gotta tell somebody.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
That. Let's talk about that.
You need this. Listen to this.
Memorable and exciting.
Well, then be less boring.
I'm going to tell everyone. Wait here.
Mighty remarkable, Big Daddy.
Remarkable.
Welcome to Remarkable, a podcast for B2B marketers that deconstructs the most iconic moments in film, television, pop culture, and advertising for a single purpose: to give you, the B2B marketer, the same storytelling techniques that the pros use. In each episode, you will learn techniques from Hollywood, Pixar, Marvel, and beyond, from Spielberg's hands to yours, bringing remarkable content ideas to you every single week. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. This is Remarkable. And this week, we're talking about B2B marketing lessons from the Olympics with the help of our special guest, VP of Marketing at AppsFlyer, Carolyn Bao.
Paris, the city of lights, and the city of love, bien sûr. A welcoming world capital of passion, invention, and big ideas. From this came a vision for sports and how we could change the world. Pierre de Coubertin, merci. Paris stands ready again to share its very best with the Olympic movement in 2024.
Carolyn, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Ian. I'm glad to be on the show.
Very excited to have you here. So why did you pick the Olympics to talk about today?
Yeah, I think Olympics is really interesting because as you and I started to talk about this show, it was in the height of Olympics games being broadcasted to several billion of people. But meanwhile, what's really interesting in terms of Olympics are two things I think marketers can all learn from. The first thing is to activate marketing around Olympics at this scale is massive. This is sort of our Coachella for marketers because we don't get to have these many dollars to spend for majority of us. And meanwhile, even if we are with a huge brand, it is not often that we have this kind of massive celebration. So the scale is super important. The second piece that's very interesting is in terms of how to ensure marketing is done right, there is a great deal of discipline in running a smooth marketing operation, which I think everyone can still also relate to because no matter big or small, for our marketing campaigns to be successful, we have to also wear that operational hat. And I think there's a lot to be unpacked from studying how Olympics have been done.
And zooming out to, your role at AppsFlyer, can you tell us a little bit more about how you think about marketing at AppsFlyer?
Yeah, for marketing at AppsFlyer, it's very interesting because we are both typical and atypical. So we're typical in the sense that we run marketing just like a typical highly functioning B2B SaaS marketing department because we need to make sure that we build this B2B demand generation engine from making sure we have all the essential components. But meanwhile, I did say we're kind of atypical is because AppsFlyer has earned two things really early, which we still benefit from to this date. One is we have achieved product market fit very early with our core customer audience, which is the gaming mobile apps. And they fed us back a lot of the things that we currently now scale out to other segments. The second thing that's super interesting and atypical is we started this celebratory annual conference. We built our brand from a lot of the industry events where we participate in a way that AppsFlyer has been credited as creating usually the magical experiences for people as they meet in person.
Meredith, can you tell us a little bit more about the Olympics?
Of course. So I could have gone in so many different directions for this one, but I chose to focus on specifically the marketing behind the Paris 2024 Olympics.
That is Meredith O'Neill, our amazing producer extraordinaire.
So a lot of the marketing was done through sponsorships. So there's an International Olympic Committee, and they had a sponsorship revenue goal of $1.34 billion, according to Imperial Analysis. So that's huge. So crazy. And part of that was making sure that the actual viewing experience was super special and even better than last Olympics. So they partnered with Alibaba for an improved viewing experience. It was actually AI powered. They had this multi-camera replay system. And so it lets you see the action from like multiple viewpoints. They had smoother, slow motion replays. So there are a lot of like nuanced ways that you could view what was going on. And then as far as like sponsorships, there are like huge companies obviously sponsoring the Olympics. One I wanted to highlight was through Nike. They had a campaign that was called Winning Isn't for Everyone, or Victory Isn't for Everyone.
Am I a bad person?
And so you saw slogans like, my dream is to end theirs. So it's pretty edgy, kind of, yeah, Jesus, right. The ads were by Wyden and Kennedy Portland, and they're narrated by Willem Dafoe, which was a really interesting choice because he often plays the villain in movies.
I'm delusional. I'm maniacal.
And it also starred athletes like Serena Williams, LeBron James, Sha'Carri Richardson. And there are also billboards as part of the campaign, but it sort of explores the like more negative aspect of like the winning mindset.
I'm single-minded. I'm deceptive. I'm obsessive. I'm selfish. Does that make me a bad person?
So they sort of subvert the positive, aspirational, heroic aspect of the mindset. And so they have this sort of like ruthlessness that elite athletes have to win. And it really reminded me of like Sha'Carri Richardson looking over at her competitors right before she won the 100-meter relay.
Change to Dallamina. Here comes Sha'Carri Richardson. Look to the far side. Sha'Carri's got him covered. All the way to the line. USA wins gold.
She like puts it into overdrive and just like goes past, and it's an amazing moment. So Nike is really like subverting that language. And they used insights from hundreds of their athletes' partnerships in this campaign to really source like what's going through their mind when they're competing. And it's a move towards this like what they describe as sharper and bolder marketing. And it's the biggest initiative since they got their new CMO, Nicole Hubbard-Graham, and she stepped in at the beginning of the year. And so she's taking the brand in sort of this edgier, bolder move. So I thought that was really cool. And then, of course, Samsung had a campaign called Open Always Wins. So they highlight the importance of inclusivity and diversity.
Every failure teaches us to find an opening. It's how we break new boundaries. With open eyes, we can take bigger leaps. Looking far beyond the finish line to somewhere new. Somewhere we never thought we'd see. The Olympic Games. Open always wins. Samsung, proud sponsor of the Olympic Games Paris 2024.
And one part of it was giving, I thought this was so clever. They gave athletes and their families a special phone. It was the Galaxy Z Flip 6 Olympic Edition, in case anyone is curious. And so the idea was like winning athletes would be up on the podium taking victory selfies using their Samsung phone. And so that was super present during the competitions. Then Coke had, and who's actually an official sponsor of the Olympics, they launched a campaign with the slogan, "It's magical when the world comes together." So of course they had a TV ad featuring Olympic athletes, and they, I don't know why, or they exploit the power of the hug. So they're all hugging and embracing and showing Olympic athletes coming together. And they also collaborated with French artists to create the special edition hug cans, which when you put a pair of these cans together, it shows a picture of two arms embracing.
Oh, I didn't realize that's cute.
Yeah, it's super cute. And then the last thing I wanted to say was like, I feel like a lot of the marketing happened on social media, specifically from like individual athletes. And so you saw that on TikTok or Instagram. And so like there was this Norwegian swimmer, Henrik Christensen, aka the Muffin Man. He was the guy who got obsessed with the chocolate muffins in the Olympic Village cafeteria. And his post got like 100 million plus views just of him enjoying these delicious chocolate muffins. And then there was a Turkish marksman who won silver in the air pistol competition. And he got a lot of attention because there are all these people wearing like special eye gear to like see their target. And he just showed up in his t-shirt and his glasses, like, and you just see him like, yeah, eyeing the target, and just, he did awesome without any of that special stuff.
They have to start out at a 45-degree angle and no support, standing completely free from that podium that is in front of them. It's all them.
And then there was the pommel horse guy.
And his name is Steven Nitorosik.
But he was the guy who waited all day for his his part of the competition. And I think he was known for like doing Rubik's Cubes really fast while he was waiting. Someone was like, he pummeled the F out of that horse because he had his one event that he looked forward to all day. And then he just did amazing and won.
This is what he does. One thing, pommel horse.
And so you saw a lot of that on like TikTok and Instagram. And it's cool because you got like the inside view of like what's actually going on during the Olympics. And so I think, if I were to take sort of lessons from this, it's like you can launch, a special campaign based on an event, and it sort of leverages the media that's already getting attention. You can have user generated content like from the specific athletes. But I'm curious, Carolyn, sort of what you saw in Olympic marketing that drew your eye.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent recap. I feel like I just relived Olympics again.
Oh yeah,
I was eager to bring up the knitting swimmer.
That's right. Oh, I did
Thomas
bring
Daly.
Yeah, he's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about just maybe a couple of things, Meredith, you have mentioned. One is if we consider Olympics as a product, they really have sort of reinvented itself to incorporate so many interesting elements. The Louis Vuitton sponsorship that really stylistically elevated even the tracks into purple. Just a lot of the details, I think from a product management standpoint, they have done a wonderful job. And also something interesting to draw a parallel to Olympics is Super Bowl for US. But what's interesting with Super Bowl that is different from the Olympics is Olympics sponsorship, obviously, it's also in the dozens, sometimes, more than a few dozens of millions of dollars. But you get to really stretch the time length of how frequently your brand gets exposed versus Super Bowl. It's 30 seconds for $7 million. So the payback calculation is very different. And I think from Olympics sponsorship standpoint, if your brand's total revenue allows you to partake in this sponsorship, you do see the payback is tremendous. I used to work for Visa. So whenever I see when they're running on the tracks and I see these Visa signs, I still feel like, yes, let's go, because you see the brand gets mentioned without the brand needing to say anything, but it's everywhere. So that's the second piece. That's the length and the frequency of how often the brand shows up. The third piece that was very interesting is just the amount of celebration from seeing how the athletes, either they overcame severe hardship. This year, I think this year's Olympics was also extremely, meaningful because there's a couple of aspects where the humanity really wins. So women now is half of all the Olympians that are competing. The refugees have their own league and team, and they won gold medals. So there are just a lot of things that are humanity driven where it just immediately helps, again, recognizing we're not talking to marketers, but for marketers there in the audience, it really helps the brand to be associated with a IP that is generally very positive, very uplifting. And that's needed for everyone. So I'll just pause there. I think those three things are just really amazing.
Yeah, and I want to touch on all those. And I love that you're such a product marketing expert because it's so fun to have someone with your expertise on the show. So in terms of length and duration, I think that this is something really interesting because they also put a restriction in place on sponsoring the Olympics, where there's all sorts of things that you can't do unless you're Olympic sponsor. And do you know offhand how long it is? But it's like quite a bit of time, right? Like you can't work with any Olympic athletes or anything like that for it's like 6 months or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, I forgot the time limits. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. The playbook is extremely detail oriented. I recall I had to make sure we have a legal person working with us, studying all the contracts. Yep. We have to have an entire team of Olympic marketing folks who, in a way, I was really jealous of their jobs. They flew to the Olympic site a month beforehand just to make sure they fully understand both how to activate and recognizing all the limitations. Because oftentimes, even if you have the right, for instance, to activate digitally, you may not have the right to activate physically. There are just a lot of things. I think this is where the left brain of marketers really have to come to play You have to really be willing and able to study the contracts with as much attention to detail as possible. Luckily, though, I need to give a plug to AI these days. When you do have these kind of contracts, you can use ChatGPT. Obviously, hopefully it's your company sanctioned version, but you can really run through the contract against these kind of AI tool and say, synthesize for me the things I must be aware that I have to do.
It's such a great point. So how much did you work on those campaigns in the past, on Olympic campaigns? It seems like you were at least involved a little bit, but not getting to fly out there.
No, I wasn't. Yeah, I was working on an adjacent product. So I only get to contribute some funds so that our product was mentioned in the Olympics campaign. And by working with the team, because later I also led social media strategy for Visa USA. This is when my work was more kind of connected with the Olympics campaign. I got to see behind the scene in terms of how a large brand would activate Olympics. It's not just months, it's years. We plan ahead of time. For me personally, my involvement, if I were to synthesize and summarize, is to first understand what the activation plan was, why we're doing it. So a campaign brief was critical. And the second piece was how we allocate the budget in terms of the working dollar versus the non-working dollars. There is a general consensus that each marketing team should be really mindful of, so that maximizing your ROI from the non-working dollar, which is the content production, becomes very critical. And the third piece is to have a plan B, C, D, E, F, because you may be sponsoring athletes. They may or may not win. They may not qualify. So your social media copy is usually baked 3 months beforehand.
Amazing. Yeah. And I think that's important to dig into there a little bit further. What's so great about the Olympics is many things, but like you said, the positivity, the length, it's really the only event other than, you could argue, sort of like the World Cup in soccer, that sort of like brings the entire world together. But I think it does so in a way that's very different than the World Cup, because the World Cup is sort of about countries, but also about the sport, whereas the Olympics is about the athletes. Like, it is about these crazy stories. And so many of them are written the days of the event, right? Like, the Turkish guy or the pommel horse guy or the breakdancing girl or whatever it is. All those stories that are written, like, when you're back in the day, you're sitting there at Visa, you couldn't have written the social copy for those things, right?
That's so true. Yeah. You have to have a war room every day.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so interesting is, like, I think it's like the perfect, like you said, sort of left brain, right brain for marketing, because you have to know the contracts, you have to know the details, you have to be able to figure out, what can we predict for, if Simone Biles wins versus if she loses versus, what happens if the U.S. medals, if the U.S. doesn't, if, like, what are the different things there? And then you have to be super flexible that all of that could go out the window at a moment's notice, and you need to sort of prepare for other things.
Yeah, I think something I want to call out is it calls for a team to really have gotten themselves sort of their foundational work ready. First is the team needs to be really clear on why are we doing this? What are the objectives? A large campaign like this. The second is having a measurement plan in place. Like, how do you actually understand what all of these things is producing? And oftentimes there's a deliberate choice in terms of KPIs you choose to assess whether we're successful or not. And the third thing that's also very interesting is culturally, whoever is being put on this team, could we have a good working model so that when we have different opinions, we have a clear decision-making process. We also have an attitude where we may agree to disagree, but we're in this together. Let's act quickly. I think those three components in terms of objectives, measurement, and the culture also easily can make or break such a large investment like Olympics.
With so much planning that has to happen, and so much bandwidth for your team, I want to talk about for a little bit sort of the idea of to do it or to not do the Olympics. Because I think that that's a huge, if you're a big company that's thinking about content and thinking about investing in brand and all that stuff, like, to make this type of investment is a big investment with dollars, but also with time. And, oftentimes these type of decisions isn't, should we do it or not? It's should we do it or do something else with those funds? And I'm just curious how you thought about those type of decisions.
Yeah, this is a very common $1 million question, right? As people said, it depends. Channeling my inner future politician of me. But why? Because I think it depends on what the core objective is. And there's almost no surprise. The immediate payback from an investment on Olympics or Super Bowl, maybe FIFA, is not there. And in fact, there is a sort of general belief that whatever you spend on Super Bowl, you have to double your demand following the commercial in the next year just to make up for that investment. Because it is, to your point, Ian, the amount of dollars that can be pulled into these kind of sponsorships tend to be taken from your other high performing channels. So when I say it depends, it really depends on, one, does the brand have the support from its leadership, C-suite and boardroom, to say, we're in this for the long haul, because we're not going to assess and judge your ROI by next 6 months or even next 1 year. But we believe we want to build the brand. The second thing I think it depends is depending on whether this marketing team has actually thought through the 360 degree of activation. This includes pre, during, post the campaign, so that the brand itself has an effective way to capture the traffic. I will use a small example of what we do with AppsFlyer, for instance. At AppsFlyer, we sponsor the largest industry conference, which is called MAU, Mobile Apps Unlocked. As much as we spend money on sponsoring it, which is a large chunk of money, we don't just pay and show up. We actually do pre, during, and post to make sure we really maximize the ROI. I think the third thing in terms of thinking about assessing large investments like this is we need to be aware that large investments like this also requires a large amount of production. And that needs to be thought through and committed ahead of time. So yeah, 3 things in terms of committing your production resources. First is committing in for the long haul. Second is making sure the activation is fully prepared, pre, during, and after. And the third is committing the production dollar so that this sponsorship itself is actually supported by good storytelling.
Yeah, what does good storytelling look like? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think marketers, as much as the new tools that are available to us, I almost feel like I really want to be a strong advocate for grounding our work back to good storytelling. And it's not that complicated. We can forget about ROAS, but we can forget about many other new tools. What's super important is to think about storytelling ultimately is to find whom it is that we're trying to talk the story to. And the second is, how do we want them to think or do differently after seeing our story? So this really begs the question for, as a brand, do we really understand our ICP? If we could highlight just one thing out of today's talk, I think I would like to really highlight knowing your ICP and knowing what you want your ICP to think or do differently from your storytelling is critical.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, one of the things that, you mentioned a little bit sort of like, do we do Super Bowl? Do we do, something else? Why invest in the Olympics? And I think the positivity piece is really important. Like, people really love the Olympics. They love the stories. They love digging into it. People are so active in doing watch parties and following along and being part of the zeitgeist. There's so few moments where things that happen in the zeitgeist like matter, right? Like the Super Bowl is a massive moment, but again, it's more about sort of like the party and like, it's almost like a holiday, right? It is basically at this point, right? In America, 100 million plus America, a third of people are watching the Super Bowl, right? So it's about going to a party, hanging out with people. Some people care about the game. Some people don't. Maybe your team's in it, maybe not. But the bigger thing is about sort of the party on that day, right? And there are storylines, obviously, but you don't get the connection to it in the way that you do with the Olympics. And, positive and sort of negative, right? Like the depth is so much deeper there. But if you want a positive brand association, then you will get that with the Olympics, right? Like if your gut tells you that I want our brand to be associated with the Olympics because it's amazing, like you're going to get that. If your brand is associated with a Super Bowl, as not to compare the two a ton, but like it might be a bad game. It might be two teams that maybe people don't necessarily want to watch. It could be lower performance or upper performance or whatever. Tom Brady isn't in the Super Bowl 50 more times, anymore. But the Olympics is always a hit. It always does well. You know that there's going to be amazing stories coming out of it. And if you don't pick the Simone Biles or the like big time competitor, you know that you're still sort of in a soft landing zone where everything that you're responsible for helping make this whole thing happen. And I think that just like to your point earlier about AppsFlyer and you sponsoring a big conference, there's just an amount of belief that you have to have as a marketer that like we want to associate our brand with this thing that is so cool that we could not manufacture that level of coolness on our own.
Yeah, very true. I think leveraging critical cultural moments is one of the key growth drivers for any marketing departments. I think what's also very interesting in terms of Olympics, as you mentioned, and I thought that was interesting to talk about when and whether a brand should be activating a big thing like this. I would say there are several different types of companies that come to mind. If you're already a big company, you're doing business globally. Let's say hypothetically, that would be AppsFlyer. We do that globally. But is Olympics our best first bet? It may or may not be, because our ultimate decision maker is going to evaluate us in a more rational way, because this is business to business software. Versus if I were a brand that sells globally to consumers whom I know if they feel good about my brand, they may just fork out the money pretty quickly, which is why, the consumer brands tend to partake on this much more so than the B2B brands. But on the other hand, if I were a brand that really wants to hone in and penetrate the US market, where should I go? By and large, Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a brand wants to be in US, there are a lot of companies like that. They may have been started from another geo, and they really want the American consumers to take notice of them. You'll see this year, there are several internationally born brands that have bought not only one, but two Super Bowl spots. I believe also for that purpose.
Yeah, it's a great point that, if having that global audience really matters to you, that it's a totally different thing. But I do think that also it's just the type of, those big moments and what you want to do. The one thing that I want to talk about, final thing on Olympic, well, unless you have more stuff, but one of the things I want to talk about is those restrictions. I know that like we want to talk about fun and brand and creativity and all that, but the restrictions thing is real. And there's a lot of marketers that don't do well in those type of situations where they want to do the net new creative thing that has sort of no limits. Whereas if you were going to work with the Olympics, it's a much tighter, stricter set of guidelines and rules. Like you said, having a lawyer work with you. Just curious to like navigating that and like personality wise and brand wise, like if that's something that you want to do versus, maybe an unconventional approach.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I'll probably say this, and I could be in the extreme camp, but I think no marketers have no restrictions.
True. Yeah.
Give me anyone. I'll say they all have restrictions, right? There's brand guideline. There's budget limitations. Maybe this is more of a maturity point. If you're a mature marketer, you have constraints. However, with constraints, creativity really differentiates a good storyteller from a mid storyteller, leveraging the Gen Alpha language.
I love it.
But when Olympics imposes these many restrictions, it really makes it even harder. So I think this is where the good students get differentiated from the average students, because like with any other sports, the more we all understand the limitations, the better it is you stay focused and think about within all of these constraints, what else could we do? I think my belief is first ground your work around the marketing principles. Again, deeply understand whom it is you're really trying to influence. Because the same Nike spot, for instance, it could have been speaking to just everybody that wants to become fit versus I'm Nike. I'm really honing into athletes that really want to push the limit and exceed their own PR, personal record. That is a different kind of way. So the marketing principle always wins. The second thing is, as you create all this content, savvy marketers, by the way, a lot of them are in our client base. They know they're not doing marketing content production the same way as old-time marketers. Why? Because they create these stories. They run it on mobile marketing channels. They run with a very small dollar amount, and they already got data to tell them what stories resonate with who. And that is super awesome because then you pull forward your feedback loop a lot shorter. And the third thing I think is super important is, as you think about all these constraints, really, really have a support system because there are things that maybe I didn't understand or I missed, but Ian and Meredith, assuming we're on the same team, we can vet each other's work and you may point out and say, hey, looks like that's a limitation. Are we like really clear? And having that support system within your company is super critical.
Yeah. My final sort of like B2B marketing takeaway is if you were to go to a B2B company and say, hey, your amazing big user conference that you do every year, let's do it every 4 years. You'd think that that's the craziest thing. And I'm not saying that I advocate for that, but I think that there is power in finding the right balance for doing certain types of things. And there's not a lot of companies that have the ability to plan in massive time horizons, like every 4 years, or a lot of marketing teams, you're probably working 1 to, 3 quarters out for most of it. But I do think it's interesting to think of like, what are the big, massive bets that you can make that you might not be able to make every year that can just show who you are as a brand. And I think, again, if the Olympics was every year, we would all still love it and maybe it would work just as well, but I suspect that it would not.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point is a little bit sort of deferred gratification as well as the scarcity that brings the sense of privilege. I think in B2B marketing, that reminds me of one thing, maybe also to leave with the audience. Really think through for our category, for your category, for my category, what is that cultural moment that we really want to capitalize on? For AppsFlyer, it has been the Mobile Apps Unlocked conference, which by the way takes place in Vegas, 4 days in a stretch. So you can imagine the festivities there are. And then for ourselves, we also have a owned and operated event, which is called MAMA, all cap, MAMA, MAMA. It really represents mobile app analytics and marketing. So that is our sort of cultural moment that we're creating. And yet you brought up an interesting point of whether to run these kind of trade shows or large conferences annually. We currently are committing to do it annually. Very easily we can think of the Dreamforce for Salesforce. Mm-hmm. In B2B marketing, not everybody competes on Olympics, but we do compete in terms of how many in-person, I think, interactions we have with other practitioners. And that's where these in-person conferences immediately became popular again after we came out of COVID. So I think that's maybe something to really think about is what is your Olympics equivalent to round up this particular point about Olympics?
I did think of one more thing for Olympics. Another thing that I think is a good B2B marketing takeaway is when something is just as important as what it is. The Summer Olympics happens in the summer and people want to hang out and watch the Olympics and hang out with their friends and sort of like half work, you got work on, you're doing a little bit of work, but you're also watching it, you're hanging out, it's sort of always on. I distinctly remember going on vacation with my family, always having the Olympics on, sometimes Tour de France is on too or whatever, like there's stuff going on and you're sitting there in the cabin and you watch it at night and all that. that is a huge part of it. Winter Olympics, opposite scenario, right? Where you're like, well, it's cold and snowy outside. There's nothing else to do, but I put on the Winter Olympics, right? So I think that that's like an important thing that I think people like get wrong. I don't know if you're a fan of the World Cup, but we did this last World Cup, and it wasn't in the summer. And it felt really weird because everybody was like, well, this is kind of supposed to be in the summer. And like and it's kind of nice in some ways, but also, not in others. And there were reasons why they did that. But I think it's an important thing to recognize, like, when you're doing something actually matters, especially with like where you do it and the vibes of that thing and, and all of that. I think that there's opportunities for B2B companies to think about that stuff a little bit more strategically of like, when is the best time to go to do, a thing, right? If you do an event in, closer to the Southern Hemisphere in a time of the year where it's nice weather and it's freezing cold up in, the East Coast, yeah, people are like, yeah, I'll go to Miami, during this season or whatever it is. So I think that thinking of things like that it matches sort of the vibes, right? Of Summer Olympics, summer vibes, and people are just more apt to do it. A lot of people on vacations and things like that. So Meredith, anything else there? You're still thinking about Pommel Horse Guy doing the Rubik's Cubes?
I'm still thinking about Pommel Horse Guy. I mean, I think the one thing that came up when you all were talking was when you mentioned good storytelling. I feel like a lot of the good storytelling is human-centric with the Olympics. And I think with how social media is being used more and more every year, like I think that has been able to express those human-centric stories about like Suni Lee and her journey with illness and things like that, and still doing very well at the Olympics, I think is really given viewers a real taste for like who they are as people as well as athletes. And so I think that's like really come across as social media has become more prevalent.
Yeah.
The last thought.
It's such a great point. And it's like the classic B2B thing that we don't do is, and we talk about this probably every episode, is like the human-centric stories, right? It's like, tell the stories of the human being. And we tell only the business side of the story, but there's so much more than that, behind the scenes. That person almost got fired and then they did this. And then all of a sudden they turned everything around and, anyways.
Yeah. I am seeing more of that, I should probably say. And by the way, the audience and you guys are still learning about me. I'm a extreme positive person. So I always see a lot of positivities. I do see a lot more of that on LinkedIn these days, where folks may be talking about their infertility struggle. They may be talking about how they came to founding their company as a broken immigrant. And there are like a lot of these stories where I think the founders, this is what I really want to highlight for everybody, is if you are building a B2B brand, really make sure that there is a founder side of the humanized story, so that it's not just this brand, but it's actually the why the company was even founded and how the founders have built the company. Actually, our PR manager, Brad, knows that we last year had a really funny video got featured on one of these major industry trade shows where our CEO went on stage and showed a video of him trying to knock a hole on the wall when the water pipe got pierced through and water was just flooding through towards his kids who were sitting in the room. Everybody was screaming. It was like a 30-second quick video, but showing that despite being a CEO, he was also a father of 4. And he had to care for a newborn. And it was both funny and it was just humanizing. I think ultimately in storytelling, if you could hone in as much of the humanized aspect as possible, where you publish that story is really secondary, but really find those stories so people can relate to the why, the how, and just the overall why they should be associated with this brand.
I love that. I totally agree. We've been doing these executive interviews as part of we have this offering where we interview your executives like every quarter and make a bunch of video content. You would be shocked how many companies don't have their executives on video, just talking about anything, but talking about all sorts of things with the company, what they went through founder story wise, what they've gone through recently. And it's not just founder story, from back in the day. It's like what's happened in the last year. There's all sorts of things there that they've just never said in video format. And I think about that stuff all the time. One of the reasons why I started this company to be my company, Caspian Studios, is because there's so many brilliant stories locked in people's heads that they've never even shared publicly. And like, if you can create vehicles in which they can share those, then that's super powerful. But yeah, I totally agree. Those founding stories are so, so, so important to be able to market those. Okay. AppsFlyer, obviously, you shared a little bit about, the company and about the cool stuff that you're doing. How do you think about just making investments, investing in brand, investing in content, and all that at AppsFlyer?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Not really too much of a company IP. I think I want to highlight a couple of things. One is AppsFlyer is in this sort of growth spurts, if you will. It was beloved right away by the gaming clients, and later very digital savvy brands all just automatically found AppsFlyer. So for us right now, we are growing up to become this enterprise tool. And this year we're seeing a lot more enterprises to adopt AppsFlyer. What we're betting on going forward are a couple of things. One is we are broadening the brand narrative in terms of what the brand stands for. Because if people used to think AppsFlyer as just a tool to count my ROI, you can be a utility. Versus AppsFlyer now is really trying to elevate our brand around the fact that we're here to help marketers to make better decisions. We're more in the decision-making sort of science side of the business. The second piece that's super important in terms of content is, as much of a big business we have built, we also recognize there are going to be adjacent markets that we're entering into. They have heard of AppsFlyer, but they don't fully understand what AppsFlyer is or what they can benefit from using AppsFlyer. So we're creating new set of content to help them understand what is mobile measurement, what is mobile attribution, what is even data collaboration. And by the way, some of the execs who are the beholders of billion-dollar advertising or marketing dollars may not know that they need to think about data collaboration, first-party data, the fact that in advertising, there is signal loss. There are a bunch of nuanced things that AppsFlyer knows, and we need to curate them into stories where we can tell to the right audience. So that is a massive amount of opportunity ahead of us, and I'm personally super excited about.
Amazing. Any other final thoughts here before we get out of here? Carolyn, it's been just an absolute wonderful time chatting with you about the Olympics and AppsFlyer.
What I want to maybe leave the audience with are a couple of quick shout outs. The first thing is, no matter what tools you use, please do not forget, let's ground our work back to marketing fundamentals. Mm-hmm. Our marketing fundamentals is storytelling. And we really need to understand whom we're talking the story to, what we want them to think or do differently. This is the first. The second piece is, please do not be afraid of developing that left brain as a marketer, because the tools to help us measure our work and tell us the feedback of how well our storytelling did are becoming a lot more available. If you don't know, search it up, use ChatGPT, but really, really deeply understand marketing measurement and the data that is at your disposal to make you a better marketer. The third piece that's super critical is, do not forget stakeholder management, because with the support, with the village that supports us, is what we can work on our day-to-day, the blocking and tackling, but also when the time is right, advocate for big activation like the Olympics and really make history. Have fun with it.
I love it. Fantastic advice. Don't forget the basics. Carolyn, wonderful chatting with you. For our listeners, you can go to appsflyer.com. Any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
Come to our conference that is taking place on January 28th in San Francisco.
Amazing.
It's called MAMA. So check it out on appsflyer.com and connect, or otherwise connect with me. I'll tell you everything about MAMA.
Perfect. Thanks so much and take care. Well, that's it for today. I hope you got some good ideas for your B2B content. Thank you for listening to Remarkable. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. Remarkable is created by the team at Caspian Studios, B2B podcast as a service. Caspian also creates fiction series for B2B companies, so if you want a business thriller, you can learn more at caspianstudios.com. Hollywood-style storytelling for B2B. And in today's episode, you heard from myself, Ian Faison, and Meredith O'Neill, senior producer here at Caspian Studios. Remarkable was produced this week by Meredith O'Neill, mixed by Scott Goodrich, and our theme song is Solomon by Falak. Be remarkable and rise above the noise.